Today, we are going to be talking about TikTok success, your brand built a TikTok audience, now what, learning from leading brands. We've got a great lineup today. We did this webinar last year, and I think we all knew last year that TikTok was going to be big, but it really has taken off and become a primary channel for a lot of brands and a secondary channel for even more brands. So we're kind of in that mainstream glide moment where the social network is becoming the first social network that can really compete with the likes of Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. We've seen that with the recent watch time numbers. The average watch time per user each month has eclipsed YouTube, which I think is less of a problem for YouTube and more of a problem for Facebook and Instagram, but we'll get into more of those details very soon. Let's meet some of our panelists. I do want to introduce and give you the accolades for each one. Madeline Moy, who is a previous Social Fresh speaker. Madeline, thanks for joining us. She's the Senior Social Media Campaign Manager at Starbucks, of which one of her duties is the TikTok channel for Starbucks. We also have Nick Cicero, VP of Strategy at Conviva. If you haven't met Nick, Nick basically built analytics for Snapchat without even working at Snapchat. And he now works for a company who works with every major media brand in the world, and they do a ton of social video analytics. Jared Kleinstein is joining us from Fresh Tape Media and Gondola, of which he is the founder. A ton of brand content is produced by his shop, including a lot of TikTok content for Puma. So Jared, thanks for joining us. We also have Karina Petrillo from Hulu. She is the social media manager and is helping usher through some changes in Hulu's TikTok strategy. They've been learning a lot. They're gonna join us and talk through some of those details. And then of course we have Victoria Tran. Thanks for joining us, Victoria. She is the community director at Innersloth. And if you don't know what Innersloth is, you probably know their main product, which is the Among Us game that is so addictive, and definitely check out their TikTok strategy. Victoria is the main host of that TikTok channel. She does a great job. Okay, so this is an all-star panel. We've got some questions coming in already. We're going to go through some kind of pre-planned discussion points. We've done a little bit of work ahead of time here, but we're going to have a ton of time for questions for all of you. This webinar will run at least 1 hour, 60 minutes. If we have enough questions, we'll go over that up to 30 minutes, or as speakers are able to hang on with us. So get your questions ready. Feel free to put those in now or as we go. And then you can also enter them at the end of the webinar today. All right, so I want to kick things off with you, Madeline. One of the best ways to support kind of this more efficient, more sustainable strategy around producing TikTok content long-term is UGC. And, user-generated content is a big part of Starbucks's social media for years now. Can you talk about how you think about UGC on TikTok and how important that piece of your strategy is?
Yeah, I would love to, Jason. Thanks. And hello, everyone from Seattle, Washington, where Starbucks is headquartered. It's great to be with all of you today. Yeah, as you said, user-generated content has always been a significant part of Starbucks' social content strategy. And we knew that when we were launching it on TikTok about a year ago now, that was something we were going to lean into pretty heavily. We love UGC because it's an amazing opportunity to highlight connection with our customers and to celebrate the unique relationship that our customers have with Starbucks. It's also, we especially love it when our customers are often able to express things that we as a brand could never say, or they have such a unique way of expressing a message that it just, we know that it'll resonate with our community better than any way that we could ever present it. So when we are evaluating UGC for TikTok, we are specifically looking for videos that are aligned with Starbucks values, authentic and relatable, positive and uplifting, native to the TikTok channel, and then kind of most important, entertaining. And that can kind of take a couple of different forms in terms of what entertainment is. We also review all of our UGC with our lovely legal team. And so there are a couple of other boxes that we need to check on that side too, to make the lawyers happy. But I have to say that they understand that TikTok is a new and evolving platform. So I do want to give it up to our legal team and being nimble and flexible and working with us and improving our content. You know, like I said, we launched on TikTok about a year ago, and of the first 5 videos that we ever posted for Starbucks, 3 were actually reposts of customer videos. And we really feel that TikTok allows us to showcase human connection in the best way, and maybe is even the strongest of any of the platforms that are out there right now.
And what's, I mean, one of the things that I am always curious about when it comes to UGC process is, are you prepping your audience to get these videos? How are you, are you telling them on TikTok or telling them on other channels that you're looking for UGC? Or are you just organically doing social listening and then reaching out to kind of the best of?
We're taking the latter approach because I think that's more natural. And the thing is, we know that our community has the best content. And I don't think, unless we're looking for something very, very specific, and Starbucks hasn't done a ton of those types of campaigns, that our community, especially on TikTok, where people are so creative and are doing some amazing content, that the good content is going to be out there. It is a very manual process. And I'm looking forward to some API integrations or some better search that TikTok's gonna eventually roll out. Every time I meet with our reps, I'm like, hey, how about that advanced search? But so it can be difficult to find TikTok. You got to go through a lot of videos, and you have to watch them all the way through. It's always such a bummer when I'm watching it, and then at the very end, there's like a swear word or something else that makes the video ineligible for posting. And then there's also the ability, like when we ask for permission, we kind of do a blanket permission so that we reserve the right to edit the content if possible. So, we can edit for length, we can spice things together, we can put nude audio on top of it. One thing that's also very important to us is adding open captioning to all of our TikToks for accessibility.
And you include that in your request. I love that. And you guys have found some great gems. I mean, some of the UGC content on the Starbucks account is wonderful. Nick, I wanted to, another way UGC is useful is helping in measurements. So, you and your team at Conviva are always at the forefront of what's happening in social analytics, especially with video. Can you speak to that dynamic, how UGC can actually help your measurement and your measurement strategy on TikTok?
Yeah, and probably this will probably be a theme every time that you hear me speak throughout the panel today. But one of the things that's really important is being able to understand the messaging that you can control and what is in your strategy bucket, right? So I think that when you establish a content strategy on any platform, it's really about identifying those themes or those categories that you want to create content under, and then be able to measure kind of your baseline across all of your content, and then figure out what are those elements that move the needle. And I think that TikTok, when we think about kind of the growth of TikTok, it has always been a user-generated content, video content platform at its core. I think the first wave, we're talking about, kind of TikTok 1.5, I guess you could say. I don't know if we're quite to 2.0 yet, but if you think about TikTok 1.5 or TikTok 1.0, it was really, really about jumping on trends. And I think a lot of the brands that probably were thinking about creating content on TikTok were looking at like the dance challenges or the different things that would take off on the platform. And that was kind of the first wave, and that was very much driven by user generated content. But I think also now that Madeline gave a great example, right, is when you go to build out your content strategy, TikTok is a very involved platform, and I think consistency is key. And we all have a lot of platforms to make content for today, right? And resources are limited. So not only is UGC kind of at the core of what TikTok is about, right, is about sharing and remixing content and themes, but I also think from a content strategy perspective, it gives you a great anchor to be able to test a number of different themes against that, right? So let's say you want to go and communicate a new product feature, right? Starbucks, pumpkin spice latte is coming out there. You could create your own content around the pumpkin spice latte, and you might in some capacities, but you might choose instead to go and curate content, right, from the community, right, to go and find those videos, to find that content. And that could be something that may be a little bit less intensive of resources because you don't have to create that own content. But I think it just gives you a really nice bucket to be able to start to measure against other themes. And, UGC is a great foil for testing your own content too, right? If you're listening to what your audience is creating relative to your brand, you can incorporate those themes into your own content strategy as well, even without reposting. So it gives you a lot of source material and kind of entry points to analyze and pull insights back that you can test with your team.
Yeah, I love that. And, back to what Madeline said, it is sometimes the users can say things you can't, or you can say things in a better way or unique way, more organic way, and you can measure those messaging tactics. I love that strategy. Jared, just to pivot a little bit, some of the things brands have learned from user content is just how to be more organic and and what's really successful on the platform. You've talked about how important character-driven content it is across the board on TikTok for all brands. Can you define, kind of, for some webinar attendees that aren't familiar with that term yet, what character content is, character-driven content, and why does it work well on TikTok? How is it helpful for a more kind of sustainable strategy that we're talking through today?
For sure. So when we think of character-driven content, we think of very talent-forward content where you're seeing a lot of faces of the talent, often in like a closer selfie style with the green screen effect or other in-app features as the priority. You're not thinking like a traditional film student who's looking for 3/4 shots at a distance, like an interview setup. You're thinking selfie style. And the easiest way to describe like why it works is like a shoe brand, like you mentioned, Puma, maybe trying to promote a shoe, but the face of the talent will lead the content. It's not always putting the shoe first and then talking about the shoe. It's the face that, I'm not going to put my foot up next to my face to make an example here, but you kind of get what I'm saying. And a lot of people put pressure on themselves as brands that, like, if that's the case, we need to do character-driven content, we need talent. They put so much emphasis on one person. It doesn't have to always be the same character. It's about the style of publishing where it's about an I versus this is the brand. It's sort of like a trend we see across social right now, like when brands will tweet, "I'm so hungry right now," versus like, McDonald's serves this.
Personified,
so that first person perspective is really, it works. And the reason it works is because it's sustainable. Like if you're thinking about calendaring as a brand and you're thinking of like, what am I going to publish this month? If you're thinking of not only the kind of content you want to include and what you want to promote, but also the entire style for the whole thing, every time you're going to spend so much extra time, creative juices flowing, versus if you have a certain talent, creator and character driven content strategy should simplify it.
It seems like that's becoming more and more important. And I love the mention of this green screen effect. If you haven't seen if you're new to TikTok or just getting started, the green screen is just like your Zoom or whatever video chat you use can blur what's behind you or put a background on. It's the same effect. So you can put something behind you and talk about a video, a still shot, a screenshot, and it's very, very popular. Another popular trending feature right now is the text to speech feature. Karina, that's a huge trend we're seeing right now. I know Hulu has played with that. Do you think text to speech is, kind of here for the long term? Is it a trend and, going to be a production tool on TikTok for a while? And why do you think it works so well and audiences respond to it so well on TikTok?
Absolutely. So and I'm sure many others, I love the text to speech functionality. And Jared, you mentioned, personifying a brand, and this functionality really gives a voice to creators and brands alike. And when it first rolled out, we were, I was looking at this from the lens of, oh, maybe this is a trend. Maybe this is something that is, few and far between, may come and go, but it's really has stuck through TikTok for the long haul. We have seen this text to speech overlay sort of go through renaissances within itself, right? This original sort of Siri-esque robotic voice has now taken on a persona of its own in the platform. And I remember when the voice actually changed, everyone on the platform was like, oh my gosh, my speak to text has an accent. She sounds different. She sounds more real. And that was when, it kind of clicked. people feel more comfortable even creating content on their own from a personal standpoint when they do not have to be the voice or they do not have to be the focus of their content. So it's really fascinating how this inherent functionality of the platform has opened up the door to a whole bunch of other creators who otherwise maybe would not be creating if that functionality did exist. And then we still, can have these conversations further about accessibility and how that's opened up that door to creators and users alike on the platform. Us from a brand side, speaking of Hulu, we don't have that one character. We talk about the Ryanaires of the world, and they do a wonderful job strategically with that eye, nose, and mouth filter on their planes, and they have a recognizable character who is the voice of their TikTok account and who speaks to these trends. From the Hulu side, since we don't have that, we also don't feel comfortable just picking one person, from our team and saying, hey, surprise, you are now the voice of Hulu's TikTok. We can use that text to speech feature and give Hulu a persona without assigning a permanent persona. And another theme you'll hear from me a lot today is really leaning into the natural functionalities of TikTok as a platform. Those are the backgrounds that you can use, the filters, the screens, and those are simple trends that you can capitalize on when perhaps if you're in a brand position like me, where you are faced with a lot of red tape and a lot of legal challenges, you can still play into those trends using TikTok's offerings naturally, and it'll feel organic and approachable.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, the text to speech, it's a way for people to, like you said, to get comfortable producing content where you transition to being on screen more if you're not comfortable doing that initially. So I think it's a great tool for many reasons. The accessibility is a big part of that. Nick, do you have something?
I was just going to say, you just kind of echoed what Jared just mentioned before about the personification of brands on Twitter, right? And one of the nice things about Twitter as a platform is that you don't have to be on camera. You don't have to, share your voice if you don't want to. You have this ability to be anonymous, but very vocal in a sense, and you're able to have that. And it doesn't matter what you look like or what you feel like, right? Everybody is able to kind of have that. And there's obviously pluses and minuses for that. But when it's a video focused platform like TikTok, that does get a lot harder. You have to either be a master with the edits and, and just know how to edit clips together. But then, or you're a brand, right? Where Karina, you can't be on the TikTok all day long. Victoria has a little bit of a different scenario where, you've made that position to have a person on there. But what if you don't? Or what if you do want to have a voice, but you have a revolving door of people that work on that content, right? All these other features allow you to participate in video without just having to edit video the way that you think about, like Hulu would edit trailers for YouTube, right? There's going to be, there's other layers that you can bring into TikTok video that these types of effects allow you to do.
Yeah. I think that's important. It's actually a great tee up for my next question to Victoria. So I want to ask you about posting frequency, but like one of the things that the Among Us account has done really well under your guidance is you do have these kind of templates and frameworks that you repeat. Some of them are text to speech. Some of them are the green screen, different Q&A responses, but you're not posting as often as some brands. A lot of brands are posting 2 to 4 times a week, if not multiple times a day for these big media brands. But Among Us is typically around once a week, I believe, and you still have 2 million followers. Can you talk about kind of the decision to post less? I know you're a small company and you just don't have time maybe to post more. But strategically, how does that decision get made? And do you think that's repeatable for other brands that they can post less and just have a good strategy and succeed on the platform?
Yeah, totally. So for a little bit of context, Inner Sloth is a team of 11 people, and I'm the one person running like all their social accounts, plus their marketing, plus some PR, plus basically whatever else needs to get done. So I don't have the kind of time to make the 2 to 4 times a week posts, though that would be lovely if I could. But I think it is really like, it's one of those things where there is no real silver bullet, I think, for as with any content or social strategy. And it's really about finding a cadence that works for you. And also, I think if you want it to be sustainable, if you're like the one person making the content, that brings you the most joy and doesn't burn you out, because I think that's a really important aspect of like, social media content. And what goes along with that and what has really worked for me is also like really measuring what works or doesn't work so that you can maximize your time and resources. I did write like a bit of an article about like how I broke down basically everything and seeing what got the most engagement, what goes the most views, and trying to make sure I structured my content around that. And that's kind of like how I've done it, of just like creating a lot of content and kind of really narrowing it down to become quality content. So a lot of people talk about quality over quantity, and the ways I found to create quality is to create enough quantity so that I can figure out what works for me. And I think there is a lot of initial energy you will need to put into this, right? Like of all the tracking, of all the like creation, but once you kind of get a cadence, it really works out really well. And then your community kind of expects it. They kind of understand it's like that once a week cadence. And also just being okay with kind of like the imperfections and failure and bringing out your own style and voice in this. TikTok is really less about, you know, creating a kind of corporate ads and more about creating a true community around you. So I think kind of all of that wrapped up really helps out in terms of the fact that we don't post as often, and honestly can't post as often as a lot of other brands.
Yeah, I love that. And echoing what Nick said and you alluded to, which is making sure you're tagging the types of content and the categories and templates and different frameworks. And so you know what's working is very important, even more important on TikTok, I think, because there's such a variety of what's working and what's not working. And it changes, it changes quite often on TikTok. Madeline, I have this great quote that you gave me that I wrote down, which is great content always doesn't always perform well on TikTok, which I think was a pretty good summary of some of the conversations we're having around TikTok these days. So essentially you're saying that the shifting trends of the platform are kind of tough to keep up with, and that it's hard to know what's going to work well, maybe from other platforms or just strategically. How does that affect your strategy and, you know, just your general content production plan for TikTok?
Yeah, there are a couple things, Jason. First, I think that if you are a team or individual who's used to producing successful social content, TikTok is going to humble you. You may have great success on TikTok. You may have terrible success on, you know, and you might not do so well. And especially things that work well on other platforms just might not fly on TikTok. So I think that's you know, kind of what we have framed it up for our leadership is, especially because I think it is important to emphasize that TikTok is still a very new platform. And so our approach is very much geared towards testing, learning, experimenting. You know, they don't have really deep analytics yet. So kind of triangulating and working together to see how we're going to define success. And that's kind of a moving target because, like you said, the trends change really fast. Even something that did really well yesterday might not, you know, might be out of fashion today. So I think one of the things that we're really looking at is exploring more lightweight processes and methods of creating content for TikTok. Of course, we can do really kind of, you know, write a creative brief and go through 6 to 8 weeks of production and review, or we can do things that are more on the fly and, you know, produce things in 48 hours or less. I think that we really need to kind of mix it up and add that capability to do more lightweight and fast content that can hook into you know, current trends more easily.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard that echoed almost from everyone on the panel, is that, you know, if you're testing something new, especially on TikTok that you don't know is proven, to not overinvest in the production of it necessarily, which I think is great. Nick, do you kind of have you seen that across the board, and, you know, how are brands learning what works and what doesn't on TikTok and changing their strategies accordingly?
Yeah, you know, as I said before, TikTok is a really a game of layers, and I think that that's what's so unique about that is, you know, traditionally, and hopefully everybody here is using some type of analytics tool or a framework that allows you to categorize content based on the different themes, right? And that should be something for every social platform, right? That hopefully isn't a new concept, but bringing that into TikTok and then being able to, you know, kind of take two layers of analysis, right? So the first layer is what is the type of content and what are the messages that it lives under. So, you know, for example, I'm going to use Victoria's article, which I'll throw a link in here because I think everybody should read. She talked about, let's just use that just to keep things, relevant. She talked about 5 content types, right? What do we talk about? Game updates. What do we promote that represents personality? What do we create that shows off behind the scenes? What do we create that shows gameplay? And then, depending on other things, you can make more categories, right? This could be, you can apply this to any type of brand, right? So then what are you doing, right? You're going in and you're creating the TikTok content that falls under those different buckets that you might look at. And then, using a platform, Conviva Social Insights in particular, right? You can actually go in and tag those pieces of content. So we have TikTok analytics where you can go in and see every post that you're publishing. You can tag that piece of content and say, okay, here are the pieces of content that represent game updates, or, in our system, we have automated rules that allow you to make that a lot easier, where you can, tag posts that match your caption or that might have different objects in the video. And right. And then you have these, let's say 50 TikTok posts that all are sitting under 5 different buckets. Then you can start to analyze, okay, my game updates, what's the engagement rate on posts that I make around game updates? What is the content that I make when I make behind the scenes content? What are the weeks of content that actually resulted in big spikes of follower growth or huge boosts in viewership? And then what are the categories that I made that week? And how does that relate back to these account level metrics? So today, I think that what you really need to do is start to establish, if you haven't already, what are those core buckets, and then start to tweak things that are underneath it. Now you can say, let's do a double click on game updates and take a look at the 10 pieces of content that all focused on game updates. Whereas there's some trend in the ones that were the most successful that we might be able to replicate. Maybe it was using one of those effects. Maybe that was using a specific sound, or maybe it was because there was some other big event that might have happened, right? This allows you to go a little bit deeper into understanding what's working. Now, I will say all of that to say you have to take that with a grain of salt, because I think as everybody here has mentioned, there are anomalies that are just going to happen on any given day from TikTok, from the zeitgeist of things that are happening, from trends that happen on TikTok that you might tangentially fit into because of the algorithm and personalization. But the most important thing is you can only measure what you can control. I think that's the thing to think about. So you have the ability to know what content you're putting out there, what you want to plan to put out there, and at least establish these sets of buckets to figure out the messages that you can control. And then, obviously in the future, when you start to look at social listening strategies or things like that, you can start to apply that more. But today, I think that the best strategy for brands and things that we've seen work the best are really doing a deep dive into understanding the buckets of content that you can create today and that you can control, and then being able to see which one of those are driving the highest engagement or viewership based on the problem that you want to solve.
Yeah, I think that's, go ahead.
I just want to respond to something about both the buckets and to Madeline's point, because I didn't want to forget about content and lo-fi type of content that you can put out at scale. I think that one thing that we are all at risk of doing with TikTok is underinvesting in content, because we see things pop with a cell phone on your desk. So I think that as a brand, especially with your fastest growing platform being TikTok most likely nowadays, I don't think that brands should be falling down the path of saying, oh, we're only going to do this kind of stuff that's low lift, et cetera, because we'll see everything from that kind of stuff where we did a TikTok with Puma where we poured chocolate on top of a coffee and it got 6 million views, to Microsoft EDU where we did a series with a creator that had a 10-person crew and a whole rented set and everything, and that stuff has over 7 million views in a couple of weeks. And so I don't want brands to think that just because lo-fi does happen to work often on the platform doesn't mean that if it's your fastest growing platform, you should skip out on the high quality stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think across the board, it's test a lot of things. Don't just test one category. Don't just use text to speech. Don't just use green screen. Don't just use only character driven. Unless you find something that really works and it's just killing for you, you can do that. But I would always really maybe keep occasionally putting things out there that are outside the norm for you. Karina, that Hulu has kind of had some of those lessons recently. A lot of high production, obviously, because Hulu has this great library of content that is high production content that they can tease out. But you've also seen really low production stuff do well on the platform? Kind of how have you learned that lesson at Hulu, and how's that affected your overall strategy?
Absolutely. So when we discuss content buckets, Hulu, like you mentioned, we have our massive library of IP, and that could be just us pulling clips from episodes and posting those natively with captions and seeing how that does. But as we really gear towards this new strategy, so much of what we want to do is capitalize on trends as they happen instantaneously. And oftentimes that involves a lower lift video production. The thing with TikTok is that everyone is a creator, but not everybody has an editing bay available in their living room that they can go and, do hi-fi content. So as we were, in the past few months that I have been here, putting out content, that content was higher produced. We were sending film crews out into the streets and bringing Hulu out into the real world and doing these really fun executions that were dynamic and not just filmed, as you said, Jared, like with the phone on your desk. But those weren't hitting for us, and they weren't hitting because they weren't necessarily accessible in the way as some of these viral TikToks are. And so much of TikTok is being accessible, being relatable, and also being approachable as a brand. So when we find ourselves in a position, XYZ trend is popping off, we want to participate in that trend through a Hulu lens. So we're also analyzing, what do we have, shows that we can maybe apply here in this context and elevate us as a brand while still having a say in these cultural moments. But to go ahead, Jason, sorry.
Well, because you can't pull out a 10-person crew, as Jared was talking about, when the trend is today, right? You might have to just respond immediately. So if you don't have practice doing kind of lower production, it's harder to get those responses out quickly.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Right. Yep. And I think so much of the content that we see that is low quality, those creators are the kinds of people who want to engage with you the most. So when you see a fellow creator popping off and they use the same tactics as you, they're using the same filters as you, the same kinds of, copy, whatever the situation is, they feel like they can relate to you most as a brand because, Hulu gets it. Hulu gets it because they're using, text to speech, they're using green screen, they're using all the things that the kids are using nowadays. And that works. And again, it comes down to approachability.
I love it. And thanks to Jared and Madeline in the chat emphasizing that lo-fi isn't always cheap either. Low production look isn't always low production costs, which I think is very true. Okay, so I am going to jump to some audience questions here in a minute, just a couple more questions for our speakers, and we'll jump to audience questions. We've got some great ones queued up. So if you don't have your question in the queue already, please add it, and we will keep going through those as we can. Jared, I did want to ask you, so building on the kind of character-driven approach, how many brands out there should really be looking for that? Dave Jorgensen at WAPO does all their TikToks, at least did for like the last year and a half. He was the main character with some people occasionally coming in. Now they're kind of diversifying a little more, but a lot of brand accounts have that dedicated person as the brand. Victoria does that for Among Us. Does every brand need to look at that, or how important is that as a strategy to have that primary on-screen character on TikTok these days? Because it does seem like it works so well.
Yeah, I think brands put so much pressure on themselves to find a Victoria, and Victoria, you are a unicorn. Like, let's just be very clear. It's the Washington Post, one of my favorite brand accounts is Planet Money. I don't know if y'all follow them at all, but they have a hilarious.
It's like the cringe version of WAPO. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what I look for when I open TikTok is cringe WAPO. But it's like something where if you find it, you are so lucky. And I don't think brands should be mad at themselves if they don't. I think that they should also see if it's their brand identity to have one character that's driving it, or if their brand identity is diverse voices. You may be all about succeeding on TikTok, but if your platform is really important to promote multiple generations of people, and you're not just trying to target TikTok, you're trying to say we have, everything from, we're trying to make content for teenagers as well as 40-year-olds that are also scrolling through TikTok throughout the night. I think that's really important. And I don't want people to put too much pressure on themselves. It's more, the most pressure that brands need to put on themselves is less about like what character they need to put front and center, but how well do they know TikTok to make sure that whatever they put out there feels right for the platform.
So definitely have someone in charge of staying on trend and keeping up with the organic nature of the platform.
I think that it's not just about someone. I think your whole team should. I don't think that the person in charge of TikTok should know TikTok. I think the entire creative team should be addictively using TikTok. And I say that because we at Fresh Tape will start creative planning meetings for other platforms' content with our TikTok likes. We literally will open up our phones, go to our likes, scroll through them. That is literally how we get our best ideas cross-platform. So I think that knowing the platform well as a creative team will help drive it, not just that core individual.
I love that. I love that. All right, Victoria, we have had like a question or two or some comments in the chat about community, and I think you've done a great job with that. You had to overcome at one point a trend of kind of negative comments on the Among Us TikTok account. Can you talk through kind of what your strategy was to remedy that, and how important getting involved in the comments and building community there is for TikTok success?
Totally. Yeah. So for a little bit of context, it's sort of like a meme response thing now for a lot of games where when a game blows up or they're big, then they stop being, at the peak of popularity at all points in time. That's when people will start like turning on notifications just to reply dead game to literally anything you post. The joys of internet sometimes. Yeah, so we were obviously getting a lot of that on the TikTok, and honestly, it wasn't a fun time, especially when we would go viral, and then like that was like basically what our entire comment section would look like. And I think one of the things is so much of like success on a platform is really understanding, right, the nuances of the community in each one, their humor, the way they work, and kind of the attitude each one has towards brands, because I feel it's very different between each network. So when it came to dealing with negative comments, I knew one of the biggest things that would influence it would just be to be present within the community, to talk to them and not to convince them like otherwise, like not to be like, no, we're not a dead game, but just to acknowledge what they were saying, make jokes alongside them, and kind of shift the tone of what they were using and or use it against them. Basically like that a person was reading these comments and what they were saying wasn't actually great. And I think especially in the kind of Among Us side, we did have the advantage of being a very small team. So it was less faceless, less voiceless, and more like, hey, I'm reading these and these suck. I think when it comes to like just brands in general though, like not being afraid of your comment section is a huge thing, and shouting into the void. I think people really notice now who talks and engages with them versus who just uses it as a soapbox and who feels kind of distant and who feels like just that corporate voice that a lot of us are used to. And I think you'll see like among like a lot of other TikTok brands, like a lot of the ones that find success, and I don't know if anyone else saw the like person who is remaking all of the brand logos into like just the so good. Just I love the internet sometimes. Just seeing like, all the brands talk there, but also like reply to it, and kind of not be afraid of engaging with the community, I think just makes a huge difference in the ways that people engage with it. So yeah, just not being afraid of the community in general and of your comment section and of your community, because if you are afraid of your community, that's like a whole other problem, I think.
I love that, and it's it is the one platform where I think you can do that the most right now, where you can be a little out there more. I think the example from the logo girl, I don't think anybody ever knows her name, that I love is the Detroit.
Yeah.
Emily. Okay.
Emily Zuge. Yep.
Okay, there we go, on record. If you haven't seen her, check her out. But she did the Detroit Lions, and she redesigned their logo as the Detroit Lines, like a line. And the Detroit Lions changed their name to the Detroit Lines and had her logo as their logo. So like that was a huge kind of little PR stunt. But it's stuff like that is organic to the nature of the platform, and also shows that you're not really taking yourself that seriously. I think that works really well, if not better, on TikTok than anywhere else. So I think what you're saying is really good. Do you ever, follow-up question for Victoria, do you ever spotlight negative comments and respond to them with a video? Or, because I know you do a lot of response content, or do you just focus on kind of positive, more constructive comments to reply to with videos?
Yeah. Yeah, so for video responses, I usually focus on more positive ones,
That's
just
fair.
because I also don't want it to become like the norm where it's like, oh, if you respond negatively, for sure you will get a response from Among Us. So I try to more often than not reply to positive ones rather than
Yeah.
negative ones, but yeah.
So not a Wendy's roast day channel. Gotcha.
No, I can't do
All right.
what Wendy's does. I don't have the patience for that.
All right, so we got some questions. Very popular question we always get from Taylor. And Taylor, I'm going to warn you, we might not have a great answer for you, but what are steps to take to get your TikTok account verified? Does anybody have any new tips for that? Has anybody had success for that? I don't expect an answer if you don't have one, so don't feel like you have to say something. Nick,
I got
Nothing.
nothing.
I
Sorry.
thought you wanted me to do stuff.
I don't work for
Um,
TikTok,
We
unfortunately.
can all agree there are definitely people in this panel, like some attendees that really don't want us to say their names as who you should email. So
Yeah.
let's not. call them out.
Hopefully you
here's
have
what
a
I'll
good
say.
brand. Like I said, if you have a good brand, you should start to work on building relationships. There's always an advertising contact. So if you're a media company, you're probably in contact with them already. If you're a brand, go through advertising is always a great way
Yeah.
to get started.
And the thing I'll say about getting verified, I mean, I know it has some cachet on every platform, so I never want to, dissuade someone from pursuing that, especially if it's for a large brand. But the main reason to do it is if there are lookalike accounts, people copying your content, people trying scams and fraud on the platform. Those are the things that really should have priority to get verified. And if you are a big brand, you probably do have some cases of that you do need to contact. And it's always going to be easier when you have an advertising spend on the platform, so you have those contacts to get in touch with. So trying to find those contacts is the best strategy. And just being very successful on the platform gets you those contacts or spending some money on there. And that's just kind of the reality on every platform. Question from Mike, Starbucks and Hulu both have different localized and regionalized accounts. Is there a strategy for that? Any comments from Madeline or Karina about having multiple accounts or local communities or separate communities and having a dedicated account for that?
A lot of our efforts, specifically on my end, so I can really just speak to what we're doing from the @Hulu account, because that's really where I'm working on the day-to-day. But in terms of communities, I think a lot of success we've seen, particularly with engagement in those communities, is just really scrolling through the For You page. I do this from the Hulu account, and if I see people are talking about our content or forming communities around our content, I'm dropping in comments as if I would be scrolling from my personal. So someone had posted not too long ago that Wife Swap is back on Hulu, and they posted a TikTok about it, went super viral, and I hopped in and dropped a comment in there, and that comment alone did 33,000 likes. And that kind of just always on, eyes everywhere, pinpointing those communities and making sure that from the @Hulu account, we are reaching out to them and engaging with them actively. That's key. You're on mute, Jason.
Thank you. Are you tagging the other show accounts or stuff occasionally, or to point people to those other TikTok accounts?
I think it will depend on the content. We haven't experimented too much recently with posting, that show related clip outs or content like that, but that is absolutely, classic
Cool.
Go-to best practice.
Anything to add, Madeline?
Yeah, for Starbucks, I manage the channel for the US market, and we definitely have the most robust presence on TikTok in terms of both content and our overall strategy. It's not like we're an umbrella for the rest of the international markets, because those markets are very different, especially in terms of what kind of content resonates in those markets. So we act more like we will definitely consult with anybody. I look forward to maybe there's something fun that we can do across all the different Starbucks TikTok accounts. And I would point you, I really love what Starbucks Trinidad is doing. So if you want to check them out, I would definitely recommend them.
Awesome. Great. Question from Lindsay. how does everyone approach community engagement without an API integration? Any tips? I remember looking, or just simply going native and responding to comments. I think we covered a little bit of that, but any other tips about building community? Is it just down to the comments? Is it, you know, Jared, one of the things that comes to mind is this is something we talked about before the webinar today. We're recommending, especially for UGC, is creating original audio that users can then create UGC with, and having content that encourages your fans to kind of remix it, respond to it, use the audio of, et cetera. And those are things that are unique to the platform that kind of help create some community and response opportunities.
Yeah, I think that one of the coolest things about TikTok and UGC is that so many people think of UGC as like campaigns, like I have to, say, hey, use hashtag this to be a part of this campaign. Where TikTok, you can create a UGC trend just through engaging audio on a standard post. So a great example of that is we work with Turner and TBS Network for some of their shows. So Family Guy clips, where we were not trying to make like a whole UGC campaign around like Peter's describe. I think there was a video we did about glizzies. If anybody knows what a glizzy is, I'm sorry, that's a little inside baseball. It's a hot dog. I guess there's a stage where people described hot dogs as glizzies. So we did a piece of glizzy content, and people use that audio excessively. So it's, the same kind of goals you may have on a UGC campaign about brand equity and whatnot, but with a very, very different experience than trying to drive people to a very specific hashtag and whatnot.
I like it.
I don't know if Mike, can I answer Mike's question too? I wanted to think about about having multiple accounts. It also depends on your ability to manage it. But if you can manage multiple accounts and you're staffed for it, then by all means, people should. So it's, if you can manage it, do it. But a great example that people in the sports world are familiar with is Overtime. Overtime's main account has 17 million followers, but whenever they launch a new brand account like Overtime Season, Overtime FC, they're all dedicated to different sports and whatnot. They use each other's brands to cross promote, but then they do a great job of making sure that no brand looks like it's supplementary. They all look like they're their own brands, their own entities, that if that was the one you followed, you're good to go. So that's kind of the key, is making sure you're staffed so that you can have a great content calendar as it's
I think that's a great example, because you do have so many niche communities on TikTok where the For You page for certain people is so focused on like coffee or music or sport or some type of niche content. And if you can create accounts dedicated to that, there is some upside if you have the ability to scale that. But again, no pressure on yourself to have multiple accounts if it's not possible. We have a question: how do brands find viral sounds if most are copyrighted? Do you upload your own music? Questions on audio and audio getting taken down for brands and finding viral sounds that are not copyrighted. Any tips on that?
I can speak to this a bit, because we, as I mentioned before, are faced with a lot of legal hurdles and red tape, in particular to sounds. So we do not have access to any of the trending sounds or audios or any of the music that the library has for the general public. So we have turned to creating our own and using, our production team to create sounds that emulate or mimic current trending sounds or audios, but still hit the trend without us having to actually use that originated sound. So the Good Soup trend that's going on right now. We created a Good Soup TikTok and just actually said good soup in the way that it sounded, in the way that, the audio perceives itself. And if you are a brand who, like us, is faced with those legal hurdles, don't be afraid to just go ahead and recreate those audios, recreate those trending sounds from your own personal soundboard, and they will still perform, they will still take off. And that, again, all leads back to the point of, those lo-fi TikToks and how to get around, find those workarounds for any kind of red tape that you're faced with. But we have still seen success in that. And every day we are trying to break down the barrier and get access to more and more. I know TikTok's creator library that we do have access to is getting more expansive. So that's, certainly a plus. And, it all also turns to the content you create. If that content is strong enough and powerful enough, the audio that you pair for it, even if it is a kind of stock audio that TikTok has available to you, it will take off if that content is poppin', if that content will really speak to the audience.
We had a follow-up question on that. Can brands use instrumentals of trending sounds? I imagine if you produce something yourself, you're fine, unless you're reproducing like popular music. I don't know the legalities around that, but it's also, as Karina was speaking to, and as Jared referenced, like you're looking for trending sounds. So if you're creating a new version of an existing trending sound, it might not do very well. There might be opportunities there, like if you recorded your own Raspberries and Cream or something, I don't know, like that was going for a while. So there might be opportunities where that exists. I think just experimenting with sound more in general, like Karina was saying, is important. And we've even seen an increase of people hiring voice actors and things like that. Voice actors can be pretty affordable for a lot of brands, believe it or not, and creating your own sounds or just playing around and learning how to do it yourself, I think are all good strategies. Any other audio? We've had a few questions around audio. Shannon asked, how do you handle brand balance between trending music and legal concerns? I think we answered some of that. Anybody else's response? Madeline, looks like you have
Jason, I just wanted to add that audio can be reported and taken down at any time on TikTok. And so it's a real bummer sometimes that there are many sounds and pieces of music that we would love to lean into, but we also don't want to spend a lot of effort and work into making a video and then have the audio not work on it. So I totally agree with everything that Karina is saying. And then just one other example I wanted to throw out there. I feel like Ryan Reynolds does a really good job of leaning into trends, but putting his own personal spin on them and then not using the exact sound. So for example, that audio that's going to the I Could Be Red, Green, Yellow color song, he does a really funny version that also has Will Ferrell in it. And we can't all like have that type of talent, but I feel like—
You mean Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell don't just like show up at your office to work every day? Oh man.
They don't. But I think like it's also being true to who your brand or organization is. Like it might not be, we've all seen cringy examples of people trying to trace trends. And I think that's another thing, like the trend is not for you. Don't try to lean into it. Like, don't try to make, stop trying to make fetch a thing. It's not like you don't have to do everything that's popular on TikTok.
Yeah.
Jason,
you don't have to post for every holiday. Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
On the music side of things, there's two things that one thing people don't do often enough, which is renaming their original sound. So if you are a brand and you are putting original sound for whatever it is, to rename it does give it a little bit of a twist. So it doesn't just, every video doesn't just say original sound.
Give it a title, give it a brand that people might have some more context around what they should do with it.
Yep. 100%. And the other thing is like, we should all be really grateful for TikTok for the way that they remove music, because we talked about this when we were talking before the webinar, but like to have a video get its audio taken off and that's your punishment is so much better than another social platform where the whole video gets taken down and you're on the brink of having your account shut down in general. So I think that like, if the world evolved so that TikTok was even more strict about individual music being taken off on a post by post basis, but it was still a safer environment for posting content with audio than some of the other social platforms, we'd be lucky.
I like the muting. I like that effect. Everybody should do it that way. We had a question about producing content responses. Victoria, you've had some success with, as we mentioned before, doing responses to comments. Do you have a general strategy around that? What are you typically looking for? Is it mostly kind of informative, like we have a new update coming, or news-oriented stuff, or what's that look like for Among Us?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends. Like, so we're talking specifically about video responses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually what I try to do when it comes to video responses for Among Us is try to make the video responses helpful. So it's usually when someone has a question, and I just figure everyone else has kind of the same question, and I want to, like, make sure everyone kind of hears it. I don't really do it for anything, as I said, negative. Sometimes I'll do it if I think it's funny, but most of the time I'm just trying to basically help people out because I think that's the most useful for our strategy. And honestly, sometimes I'm not feeling creative to make like some funny response video. So yeah, but I've seen different brands do it different ways. I think it would be really cool to have more content that focuses on more funny responses to people. But that's kind of a time thing that I don't have. So
Yeah, well, it's a great template of putting something out there quickly, and you do a good job of putting your personality behind it and introducing yourself and saying, hello, this is Victoria. Sometimes you'll talk about being on the team, and you're informative, but it's always pretty entertaining and typically pretty funny as well. So I think that's like a good balance to find. Okay, how much time is spent in comment moderation, reputation management work? Do you all have a team to do that? Are you doing that yourself? What's your recommendation for other brands depending on their resources? Any thoughts there? Comment moderation, reputation management.
One thing I don't see enough brands taking advantage of, and also individuals, is your comment filter. Please use that to screen the trolls out. It's not super robust. You can only put 50 terms in there, but 50 terms is better than none. And right now on TikTok, because of the manual nature of it, again, I am the only person who regularly looks at all Starbucks at mentions, comments. And so I'm looking forward to an API again on that. But I think it's really putting the time and then knowing if there are other kind of mitigation or crisis communication processes that you already have in place, figure out how they're going to connect to TikTok. So if you have a really robust strategy, or at least like a public affairs team or somebody who will work with you to manage those things for other channels, I would see how that also fits, how TikTok fits into that. I think, and then also, I think, can't remember who was talking about, if you also have reps, they have been very responsive to us in terms of when we report things and have things taken down. So I feel like TikTok is trying to be as responsive as possible. They can do a lot more on that front, I think. But I think really, if there are things that are already watch outs for your brand or organization, just look for that stuff on TikTok and then plug that into your existing strategy.
We did have a couple of follow-ups to that. One person asked, what software do people use to respond to the comments? I don't believe there is any software. I don't think there's an API for comments on TikTok. Anybody have a correction to that? Okay, that still seems to be the case. It is
lots
all
of
manual.
Stuff in progress. Yeah.
Some stuff coming down the pipe.
Yeah, TikTok did some big announcements yesterday around a lot more ad measurement partners. So I would imagine, like I said, we're in TikTok 1.5 right now in terms of the lifetime. So I think that the swell
2.0
of activity, that's been happening we're getting to like 1.75 quickly to 2.0 here. And, that's going to bring in this whole new wave of ecosystem partnerships, right? And I think you're going to start to see, significantly more types of moderation tools, community tools, social listening, analytics tools, and a lot more that's going to come out. So I think TikTok is ramping up to make a big move here. So I'm very excited. And I know all our partners are.
And they also need to expand their caption length while we're making some requests here, because I think it's like 100 characters or something. It's way too short. Another question, and Madeline, feel free to not answer this, but any examples of words that you're blocking on TikTok that have been helpful? Besides some obvious things.
I think it's interesting. Jamie Johnson also has a comment. I think if you're a government organization or agency, there may be some additional challenge or things that you should consult with your legal team about. But of course, we start with all the profanity and all of the slurs, so all of the fun stuff. And then if there is a kind of issue that is gaining traction, so maybe there's a specific, what's really nice is you can put people's at at profile names in the comment filter too. So sometimes we'll have to do that, or things that we're just not, competitors' names. We don't need to see that in our comments. So sometimes we add those, but it's pretty limited. Like the swear words and all the variations.
It takes up 50 right there.
That takes up 50 right there.
All right. Let's see. This is a fun question. Let's jump to this one. Who are your favorite TikTok creators to get inspiration from? And that could be brands or just individual TikTok personas. Anybody have some favorite creators besides the logo girl?
In terms of brands, I brought up Ryanair before. I think they do a great job, but also most recently for me has been Scrub Daddy. The Sponge. I'm not sure if a lot of you do follow their account, but they do a really great job of capitalizing on those trends in a way that makes sense to Scrub Daddy. And we talk about, again, low lift kind of TikToks. It feels very organic and it feels very authentic to their brand. They are just walking around their office with a phone and shooting content, and it's people who work there adding a persona to who Scrub Daddy is. And in part of that conversation too, of not making trends feel forced, they're a brand that I feel fits trends nicely, and they know where they can speak to and where they can't. And that's a very valuable lesson in terms of, again, approachability. I feel like if I could walk into the Scrub Daddy office and sit down and be friends with all of them, I definitely could. And that makes me want to follow them. That makes me want to interact with them and their content. So it's a win-win for them on their strategy.
Love it. Someone says they love EOS's TikTok, EOS. Anybody else have any favorite creators?
I think that a couple creators that I love that have a style that brands can sort of learn from. There's two VFX and stop motion artists. One's name is Caleb Natali, one is Lawrence Becker, and I think Kevin Perry does this too, but their style is really interesting. They have an artistic style that's awesome. They have like either VFX, stop motion, whatnot, but there's always a how I made this follow-up to the video. And that as like a theme across the board is a great strategy for brands to take on in their own stuff. Because if you do end up investing a lot into a piece of content on your platform, knowing that the video just behind the scenes of how you made it could do better than the first one is probably a nice little thing to have in the tool belt.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many creators on TikTok, so teaching them, what you're doing as a creator is helpful. Okay, cool. We have one more audience question, or what is it about? No follow-up. Okay, cadence of your content on other social platforms. Did you stop posting as much on other social platforms so that you could post more, commit more resources to TikTok? Anybody in that situation?
We haven't seen a shift in posting cadence across platform. If anything, something that we do capitalize on is the ability to sort of have a cross-platform presence with certain content. So we will get a 9:16 cut of something that we think could also work for IG Reels, and also has a home on TikTok. So if you are in a position where you feel like you have to cut back elsewhere, try to think what kind of content can have homes on both platforms. Granted that TikTok is very niche and TikTok has things that definitely are specific to the algorithm and what works and what doesn't, but there is still definitely crossover. And I think especially as we talk about the Twitter space, there are a lot of interactions, and with Emily, the logo guru, all of those TikTok interactions have been making their way to Twitter. So there's a lot of crossover space that I think brands can absolutely be capitalizing on. And we have been dabbling in. And as we're building this new social strategy, that's something we're keeping in mind. Hulu, personally, we are hoping to amp up our posting cadence as we really dive into this new strategy. And as we do that, my wheels are turning, and I'm thinking, well, if this is popping off here, let's have this conversation on Twitter, or let's put this on Reels, or vice versa. And it's a great game of like copy paste, what can work, what doesn't work, but sometimes it's not copy paste. So trial error, but don't be afraid to spread the wealth.
I think that's great advice. I've seen a lot. I mean, there's tons of TikTok on Twitter. Twitter's really having kind of a resurgence in a lot of ways for many reasons. One thing, I talked to Dave Jorgensen at Washington Post about this at one point, maybe a couple months ago. And he said basically they have two types of content for Washington Post. There's content that does better on TikTok and there's content that does better on Twitter, meaning everything's TikTok content, but when he posts some of them to Twitter, they will actually get more views on Twitter than they did on TikTok. And it's really kind of the different audiences, like whether it's geared towards a younger audience or not. So reposting to Twitter and seeing stuff take off there is a great strategy for getting life out of it. I love that tip. We had some other comments. National Geographic is great. Zoos and aquariums in general have strong TikTok. That's pretty funny. I like that. Mod Pizza is a good one. Great feedback here from everyone. One final question, and then I want to do some closing thoughts to close this out. Thank you for everyone's time and for all the great questions from our audience. Have you seen more ROI from TikTok ads or organic content? How do you decide when to bring a paid strategy? Anybody have that organic versus paid dynamic going on, and any strategy decisions around that?
I would say that while, you know, I don't run TikTok ads for a brand or anything, we do work with a lot of our media companies in particular who are seeing a lot of success in using TikTok to drive awareness for new streaming shows and other types. And so I do think that, you know, in general, what we've seen is, you know, high users that are on social media, especially in the media industry, and then I can't speak to the brand, you know, like the Starbucks world at the moment, but you know, one of the things that we see is there's a real direct correlation with the amount of social media usage and the amount of streaming content usage. So that's probably, you know, one of the reasons why we've also seen so much success by a lot of the streaming players going and starting to advertise and use TikTok ads really effectively to drive that. So I think that TikTok has a lot of potential. You know, you have the ability with your, you know, native TikTok analytics to kind of look at the demographics and where people are tuning in from. And that's a great way to start to anchor your strategy if you're looking to go out there. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm a big fan of the ad products on all social platforms. And I think there's a really powerful balance that you can strike between organic and paid. So if you haven't really started trying those, I would definitely encourage you to.
I'll add to that a lot of brands that we work with and advise are spending in one way or another to grow audience on TikTok because they feel like they're a little behind, especially industries that aren't on there not much yet, like finance, etc. They're spending on creators, they're spending on influencers, and they're spending on ads in pretty large budgets because they do see the audience growth potential. Anyone else want to add to that paid discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to add, Jason. I think I can't share a lot of specifics, but the one thing I would want to encourage everybody to do is TikTok is where the people are of all ages. You might think like your demographic or your audience segment is not on TikTok, but pretty much by now, the pandemic has created this effect that many people and probably your customers or your stakeholders, your constituents are on TikTok. So it is worth doing the due diligence of figuring out what a paid strategy would look like for your brand or organization. And if you're not going to do paid on TikTok, you should have a solid rationale of why. Or maybe you have a plan, like you got to ramp up, like, oh, we're going to test out some of this type of paid on TikTok. We're going to maybe do a test against another platform. And just like Nick was saying earlier, there have been a lot of big announcements from TikTok just recently on their ad products and offerings. So I feel like, especially if you have some kind of mobile website or you have e-commerce, it would really be a good idea to check out if TikTok paid advertising is a good fit for you.
I think that's great advice. E-com is all over TikTok, just like they were all over Instagram a few years ago. Sandra with a recent update. Thank you for correction, Sandra. Now, if you post natively on TikTok, it's a 500 character limit. If you post via a scheduling app, it's 150 character limit. So if that is an issue, helpful details there from Sandra. I do want to close things out. Thank you again to all of our speakers. Closing thoughts. We'll start with Victoria. Anything you want to leave the audience with and how they can either connect with you or the brands. What's your summary for today to leave folks with, Victoria?
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Yeah, I think what like my kind of closing thoughts is really just I think a lot of us have talked about it's like it's about making TikToks and about making something for your community and not just ads and things that feel like ads. It's really having fun with content and understanding that like at the end of the day, you don't need to always be selling something. It's about creating a community, having a voice, and growing together with your audiences. Especially for like Among Us, like our content isn't slick at all if you check it. I don't have cameras or props. I'm not that great at video editing, but being like down to earth and feeling relatable is like a huge part of it and really at the heart of TikTok. So I would definitely encourage people to do that.
Yeah, if you haven't checked out the Among Us TikTok, definitely check it out. Thanks, Victoria, for joining us. Nick, closing thoughts today.
So my closing thoughts are really that we need to. I mean, I guess there's two thoughts. One is if I haven't said it enough, is it's really about measurement and it's about building these buckets, creating these categories, and starting to test what you control. So to summarize everything that I've said today, you could say it in that one sentence. The second thing, and hopefully I'm not stealing anybody's thunder here, but I loved what Madeline keeps talking about and what Victoria's talked about too, of going and building the community and going and finding, that content. I always think that you really need to be able to get something back from your audience. You have to give them something good, and you have to also, stealing from Jason, you always have to give them the permission to be creative, right? And I think if you can create a community that people want to make content about your product or about your service or about your app or about whatever you're putting out there organically, you're going to be able to have a better conversation, because it's always easier to have a discussion if somebody's already talking about you. And I think that's a great way to start. So, but you have to kind of encourage some of those things. So, maybe that means, bringing things into your packaging that tell people to, follow you on TikTok, or to, make I think about Chewy every time I get a box, like dog food or duck food. The box says, snap an Instagram with your dogs or cats playing with this box, right? And why not make a TikTok with your dog playing with this box? So also think about those other touch points that you might have to kind of create that environment that people are okay sharing content and talking about your brand, and slightly guiding them too, so you can make sure you don't get a lot of those, F-bombs and nefarious content that you wouldn't want to share.
Love it. And you did hear that right. Duck food, from Mr. Cicero.
Duck food, dogs and ducks here at the Cicero homestead.
And I just posted the link again to Conviva's TikTok benchmark and strategy guide. It's a great industry by industry breakdown of who's succeeding on TikTok right now. So check that out if you haven't already. If you do need measurement, analytics support on TikTok, Conviva is the place to look. So check them out. Thank you, Nick. Madeline, closing thoughts for us today.
Yeah, I want to say I'm an older lady. I'm Gen X, solidly Gen X. I've worked in social digital now for almost 13 years, and you don't get many platform launches in your career, and so they're really special when they happen. And so I just want to say I've had so much fun. I've had a blast learning more about TikTok, making content for TikTok, listening and learning from the community on TikTok. Like, TikTok is fun. I know we may be thinking of like, oh, I don't know if it's strategic, or I already have so much work to do, but TikTok is really fun. And even if you're just going to use it as a consumer, I really want to encourage everybody to approach it as this awesome challenge and awesome opportunity to connect with Gen Z and other communities, to have the most diverse kind of content and most accessible content that you may have ever created for your brand or organization, and just and be brave and play. It's a great platform. I love it.
So very negative take there from Madeline on the platform. Thank you so much. No, I love the energy, Madeline. You're always so great. Thank you for your help today. Karina, do you want to give us your closing thoughts?
Absolutely. I echo everything Madeline said. I completely agree with her sentiments. And you know, a lot of TikTok is a learning experience. So don't be afraid to grow. Don't be afraid to learn on this platform. Experiment, do new things, reach new audiences. If it doesn't hit, it doesn't hit, but at least you can say that you've tried as a brand or as an individual creator. And no matter whether you have a team or if it's just you being a one-woman show behind a platform, make sure that you have a manager who knows how to be native to that platform and somebody who is always on and somebody who is consistently surfacing trends to capitalize on as they happen, because that timeliness is everything on TikTok. And TikTok, as we all know, is the epicenter of all trends today. These trends are living cross-platform. So experiment with that cross-platform presence and don't be afraid to use TikTok to inform that cross-platform strategy. It's what everyone is talking about. Be authentic to your brand, be authentic to the platform, and play into TikTok's native offerings. Approachability as a brand is key, and I think it'll take you really far.
Thank you so much, Karina. And it makes me think of what Jared said earlier, where he referenced the need to be kind of character driven and not to put too much pressure on yourself. Jared, anything else to add to your final thoughts for today's panel?
Yeah, I mean, a couple people commented it that I have the Vine logo up here. I think it's really important to remember that TikTok didn't reinvent the wheel. We've been preaching in the social content space, particularly if you ever ran a Vine account, like relatability and faces and all that. We've been saying the same thing for years. There's certain differences, like I never could have predicted the watermark being not just something that like is okay for TikTok on the exports and it kind of helps with promoting your company, but like there's actually a cachet, or your account, but there's a cachet to like publishing a piece of content with your TikTok watermark on it. Never saw that coming. But in general, the biggest thing that TikTok is doing is that's different from anything else in the past is that the tools they're adding are changing how we create without it just being about growth hacking, right? So there's a time last month where on Instagram, people were posting screenshots and then a video because they were told that that was how you were going to get the most views on your content on the platform and hack the algorithm. When TikTok's putting new things in like green screen or voiceovers or other new features, you can actually use them to make your content more enjoyable. So it's kind of a great thing about the platform as we all use it to know that they are building stuff that we're going to get to sort of not just build into our growth hacking, but also our creative strategy.
I love that. And, you know, it's Karina, I think you said it, TikTok is like one of the centers, if not the center of kind of culture these days. Someone's mentioning the Burger King commercial being TikTok inspired. I think we see a lot of commercials and a lot of just video effects, video styles, editing styles that are obviously coming from TikTok inspiration. So it is important to stay tuned and understand that. So thanks to everyone from our panelist side. I really appreciate the time all our panelists put into this talk today. Thanks for everyone in the audience for joining us and giving us your questions. We will have the recording out for this. If you missed the beginning, apologies. We will get the recording to you in 24 to 48 hours. And that's all we have for today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with more content from Social Fresh and Conviva. Take care, all.